Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a world where survival wasn't just about having the latest gadget or trending life hack. No, tonight you'll slip into rough linen, scratch at wool undergarments, and settle in for a night of fitful rest by a smoky hearth. This is a story of forgotten medieval survival techniques, strange habits, clever workarounds, and odd routines that once stood between life and death. You're not sleeping in a memory foam bed tonight. You're sleeping in shifts, like a serf. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Invite viewers to post their location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cottage is damp and the only warmth comes from the sputtering coals near your feet. It's the middle of the night, but not the end of your sleep. You've just stirred from your first sleep, that ancient practice long abandoned by the modern world. 2 shifts of sleep, first and second, broken by a few hours of quiet wakefulness. Maybe you stoke the fire, maybe you pray, maybe you just sit and listen to the wind whining through the gaps in the wooden shutters. This segmented sleep wasn't accidental. Without electricity, people naturally aligned with the circadian rhythm. Nightfall came early, and waking after midnight was oddly restorative. You and others around you accepted this period of nighttime wakefulness, called the watch, as routine. And in many cases, it was the only time in the day you got a bit of privacy. Or if you're unlucky, a chance to notice the lice moving in your collar. You shift on the straw-filled mattress. Well, mattress is generous. It's a fabric sack stuffed with straw, bristly bits poking into your thighs, your back, your everything. Your blanket smells of sweat and smoke. Someone's feet are in your face. Family members pile together for warmth. A necessity when firewood is precious and windows are just animal skins nailed over a frame. Sleep is never deep here. It's thin and uncertain. If the dog barks, you're up. If a cow lows unusually in the shed outside, you're up. If something skitters under the bed, it's either a rat or your imagination, and either way, you're up. And let's not forget the snoring. Your uncle sounds like he's gargling gravel. Your baby brother wheezes like a broken bellows. You envy the dead for their peace. Scholars remain divided on exactly why segmented sleep faded with the rise of artificial lighting. But one thing's certain, 8 hours straight is a luxury your ancestors rarely knew. As the fire's warmth fades, you nudge closer to your sibling, elbowing for space under the same crusty wool blanket. There's a faint smell of stew, still clinging to the air from supper hours ago. Cabbage, root vegetables, maybe a shred of pork if it was a feast day. In some regions, you might even be lucky enough to sleep in a box bed. Wooden panels shielding you from the cold and curious mice. But most nights, it's a free-for-all of limbs and muttering and the occasional fart that seems to vibrate through the straw. The floor is dirt, always has been. You don't have slippers, no one does. If you have to get up, you go barefoot, stepping carefully around sleeping relatives. One misstep and you'll hear about it for days. The truth is, sleep isn't rest, it's recovery. And in the Middle Ages, you needed it just to face what tomorrow would bring. Ploughing, hauling, stitching, baking, praying, and that's a light day. Without modern medical care, sleep was one of your best defences against everything from plague to infected wounds, even if it meant doing it in 2 weary halves. Strangely, some modern sleep scientists have studied this old rhythm and wondered if it might be better than our current patterns. They note that deep, uninterrupted sleep is ideal, but also that our ancestors' 2 sleeps allowed time for reflection, intimacy, or simply staring into the flames while petting a cat you didn't remember owning. Speaking of cats, there's one curled on your chest right now. Probably not yours, but it's warm and you're not complaining. You close your eyes again, trying to slip into that second sleep before the rooster crows and your day begins with smoke, ash, and a cold walk to the well. You wake again, not because the sun is rising, but because something's hissing in the coals. A chunk of wood shifts, crackles, and spits. For a second, the glow flares up, painting your ceiling in flickering amber. You rub your eyes, time to boil water again. Nobody in your village trusts water straight from the source. The stream is suspicious. The well is questionable. That rain barrel out back, full of floating leaves and the occasional drowned bug. And so, before you sip a drop, you boil. Always. There's a dented iron kettle near the hearth, blackened with soot. You fill it with whatever water you fetched yesterday, hopefully from the cleaner end of the stream, not the end where livestock drink. You set it over the coals and wait, Boiling is slow, you're cold, your breath fogs in the morning air. But you remember what happened to old Thomas last spring, cramps, fever, and 2 days of loud, wet suffering before he finally went quiet. Dysentery, maybe, or something worse. You don't have the words for it. You just know he didn't boil. You poke the fire with a stick. The flames grumble but catch, and the water starts to stir. You're not making tea. You're making it safe. Hydration is critical, especially when your days are full of sweating through labour, trudging muddy roads, and avoiding the local lord's taxes. Without clean water, you don't stand a chance. There's an old joke your cousin muttered once. We don't drink water, water drinks us. He's not wrong. But here's the surprise. The water doesn't even taste clean after boiling. It's metallic, flat, and somehow still a bit earthy, like licking a damp stone. Still, it's better than the alternative. In some parts of medieval Europe, people even added herbs, vinegar, or old wine dregs to disguise the taste, and maybe kill off whatever the fire didn't. Experts still debate whether boiling was truly widespread among all classes or just certain households. Some scholars argue it was more common in monastic communities, while others believe it filtered down, pun intended, into peasant life out of necessity. What's agreed upon is this. People knew water could make them sick, and they got creative about avoiding that fate. You glance out the crooked window, just faint grey light beyond the shutters. A rooster cries somewhere. That means it's almost time to haul water for the day. You sigh and gulp the boiled brew. It's still warm and a little slimy on the tongue, but it's life. You remember a trick you learned from the old midwife. If the water's cloudy, let it sit overnight so the silt settles, then scoop the top. If it smells, boil longer. If it wriggles, well, boil until it doesn't. Oddly, this early morning ritual gives you a weird kind of comfort. The hiss of the kettle, the thud of the log settling deeper into the fire, the scratch of your rough wool shirt against your neck, it's familiar, a rhythm, a survival cadence. In a few minutes, you'll pour the hot water into a wooden cup and sip slowly while others wake up. You might save some for a baby's porridge or to rinse out the clay bowl you'll use for barley soup later. You certainly won't waste a drop, not when it took this long to make it drinkable. Some mornings you hear a voice or two in the distance, a neighbour cursing the cold, or someone calling to a cow. Life begins early here. There's no clock, just firelight and instinct. And yes, the process is tedious. But without it, your chances of lasting even a few days out here shrink fast. So you sit, you sip, you survive. And if this tale charms your heart, or sends shivers down your spine, whisper 1 in the comments below, or 2, if it makes your stomach churn like yesterday's stew. You step outside into the early morning chill, clutching your wool tunic tightly around you. The air bites, but you're used to it. You've been wearing the same scratchy garment for days, maybe weeks. It smells like smoke, old sweat, and faintly of onions. But more importantly, it's wool, and that means it's keeping you alive. In the medieval world, wool is everything. Cotton is rare and linen is for the lucky. Silk? Forget it. That's for the nobles and priests. You wear wool in summer, winter, spring, and whatever that other muddy season is in between. It's not glamorous, it's not comfortable, but it's dependable. Wet wool still insulates. And given how often you're soaked by rain or sweat, that's no small mercy. The lanolin from the sheep's wool gives your clothes a certain greasiness. You may not realise it, but that oil helps repel water and grime. Still, the downside. You itch. Constantly. There's a patch on your shoulder that you've scratched so much it feels raw. But you've learned to ignore it. Or at least wait until no one's looking so you can reach inside and give it a good, satisfying scritch. And don't get romantic about layers just yet. You might be lucky enough to own 2 tunics. Maybe 3 if your aunt died recently and left you one in her will. You layer out of necessity, not fashion. A long-sleeved undertunic, then the thicker outer one. If it's particularly cold, you stuff straw or dry leaves inside for extra insulation. You look like a bush, but you're warm. Modern folks love to talk about breathable fabrics. You'd laugh if your lungs weren't still recovering from yesterday's grain dust. Your tunic doesn't breathe. It broods. It holds every scent you've ever encountered. If you walk too close to the fire, it may even smoulder. One cousin accidentally lit himself while leaning in to warm his hands. He only lost some hair, but the smell haunted us for weeks. Scholars remain divided on how frequently medieval peasants actually washed their clothes. Some suggest weekly rinses in the river. Others argue that wool, being hard to clean and easy to shrink, was rarely washed at all, maybe once a season. Instead, people aired their clothes out by hanging them in the breeze or near the hearth. You do that too, shaking out dust and the occasional spider, hoping it smells slightly less awful afterward. It's amazing how something so uncomfortable could mean so much. Wool is survival armour. It shields you from rain, traps heat, and, when soaked in vinegar and wrapped around a wound, can even become a makeshift bandage. The local healer swears by it, though you suspect she also drinks most of the vinegar first. You pass the neighbour's sheep pen on the way to the stream. The sheep stare, unimpressed. Their wool is thick and matted, waiting for spring shearing. It's funny to think that their backs keep your bones warm. You nod politely, one of them sneezes. In town, you've heard gossip of nobles wearing cloaks dyed with crushed bugs, bright reds and deep blues. You once saw a knight's cloak, long and flowing, lined with fur and trimmed in silver thread. You nearly tripped just staring at it. Your own tunic is brown, dirt brown, or mud brown, possibly both. Still, it's yours. You patch the holes yourself with threads pulled from an old sock. Back in your cottage, you hang your outer tunic by the fire to dry. The inner one clings to you, damp from sweat and mist. But you'll manage. You always do. Modern survivalists talk about gear like it's all tents, filters and carbon fibre. But here, in this forgotten corner of time, your gear is homespun, itchy and reeking. But it works. You sit cross-legged by the hearth again, tugging your tunic away from your neck where it's been itching all morning. The fire's lower now, little more than a bed of glowing coals, but you've got a secret weapon to stoke it. Dung. Yes, dung. Not just any dung, dry, fibrous, compacted into little patties and stacked neatly in a basket near the fire. It's mostly cow or horse, though no one's picky in winter. You grab one, toss it on the embers, and lean back as the familiar smell creeps in. Earthy, acrid, and, oddly, comforting. Dried manure was one of the most common fuels in the medieval world, especially in treeless or over-harvested regions. Peasants collected it daily, forming neat patties and laying them out in the sun to dry. In some villages, children were tasked with dung pat rolling. One of those endearing little childhood chores, right up there with delousing the baby or scaring crows with your best death scream. The dung smoulders slowly, creating thick smoke that curls around the room and into your nostrils. You don't cough anymore. You're used to it. In fact, you find it clears your sinuses better than any herbal remedy. That's one of those strange perks. Dung smoke, unpleasant though it is, can kill bacteria, repel insects, and keep nasal passages surprisingly clear. Is it healthy long term? Probably not. But your nose is breathing freer than it was yesterday. The jury's out on whether this smoke exposure had any medical benefits, or just dulled everyone's sense of smell until they stopped caring. Some medieval texts even recommend fumigating homes with burning dung as a way to drive out bad airs. A popular theory at the time for the cause of illness. Of course, it also drove out guests. 2 birds, 1 stone. You reach for a hunk of stale bread and munch quietly as the fire picks up again. Bits of smoke catch in the roof rafters, where cobwebs dance like lazy ghosts. Somewhere outside, a chicken squawks, probably arguing with the neighbour's goat again. Dung-fueled fires were especially prized at night. Wood burns fast and coal is expensive or non-existent. But manure burns low and long. It doesn't flare. It smoulders. Perfect for keeping warm in a cottage where heat leaks through every gap and crevice like a gossip with a juicy secret. Still, there are drawbacks. Your clothes smell of smoke constantly. Your hair does too. The smoke stains the ceiling black and turns the air inside your home into a kind of foggy stew. If you open the window, the heat escapes. If you close it, you choke. There is no perfect solution, just slightly less horrible ones. Sometimes, when you're alone, you wonder if this smoke will someday turn your lungs to ash. But mostly, you're just glad your toes aren't numb. You've tried sleeping without a fire before. It was like trying to nap inside a snowdrift while someone whispers frostbite statistics in your ear. Your neighbour down the path claims she uses a mix of dung and dried herbs for her fire. Lavender, thyme, and a pinch of mint from her windowsill planter. Says it keeps her house sweet. She's lying. Her place smells like a wet goat wrapped in yesterday's turnips. But she believes it, and in a world like this, belief counts for a lot. You shift your weight, pulling your cloak tighter. The dung pat cracks in the fire, sending a puff of smoke toward your eyes. You blink through it, eyes watering slightly, and smile. This is survival. Strange, smoky, and very, very real. Tap 3 in the comments below if this story makes you smile, or 4 if it leaves you chilled like a damp tunic at dawn. You're still hungry. Bread wasn't enough, so you reach for the safer option, your clay mug filled with yesterday's ale. Not the frothy kind with a citrus twist and a logo on the glass. No, this is small beer, the weak, sour, barely alcoholic staple of the medieval peasant's diet. And believe it or not, it might be the healthiest drink in your life right now. You tip the mug back and take a sip. It's warm, a little fizzy, slightly sour with a hint of oats. Not delicious, exactly, but familiar, comforting, and most importantly, not deadly. In a world where most water could kill you slowly or quickly, beer was a lifesaver. The brewing process, boiling, fermenting, and storing, helped eliminate dangerous bacteria. Small beer didn't make you drunk, unless you drank gallons, but it kept you hydrated and gave you a few calories to limp through the day. Even children drank it. Infants were weaned onto it. Your grandmother probably bathed in it. Maybe your goat too. The recipe was simple. Barley, water, maybe some old herbs, boiled down and left to sit. Some households added leftover bread to stretch the batch. Others reused the same mash over and over, each batch weaker than the last. You've had ale so thin it tasted like barley tea left in a boot. But hey, at least it didn't make your intestines revolt. Experts still debate whether small beer was a universal practice, or something that varied by region and wealth. In Northern Europe it was more widespread, while southern regions leaned toward diluted wine or vinegar water. Either way, the logic was the same. If it stinks, drink something that's been boiled or fermented first. You belch softly. It's a nice burp. Earthy, wheaty. You set the mug down and get ready to head outside again. The chores won't wait just because you're feeling poetic about peasant brew. You glance at the small barrel tucked by the door. It's your latest batch. Not great. The foam's patchy, and the smell is somewhere between sourdough starter and wet fur. But it'll do. You spent hours tending to it, stirring it with a stick that's more cleanish than clean, watching the foam rise and fall like a sleepy tide. In towns, brewmasters had better tools. Copper pots, storage cellars, maybe even a wooden sign with a crude barley logo. But here in your cottage, you work with what you have. A pot, some hope, and your nose. The first time you tried making your own ale, it exploded. Not dramatically, just a fizzy mess and a sticky floor. The second time, it didn't ferment. The third time, it made your cousin Ralph hallucinate a talking goat. Now, though, you've found your groove, and there's a certain pride to it. When visitors come, rare though they are, you always offer them a mug of your brew. It's tradition, and also a test. If they flinch, they're not made for this life. You take another sip. This batch is better than last week's. Less mould, more bubbles. Still smells like wet leather, but you've developed a taste for it. So when people today talk about detox drinks, miracle waters, and high-performance hydration formulas, you smile inside. You survived on weak beer, smoke-dried turnips, and boiled rainwater. Your version of electrolytes was licking a salt block and chasing it with barley fizz. You grab the mug again and swirl what's left. Tomorrow you'll brew another batch. Maybe you'll toss in some mint or dried berries if the hedgerow's kind. Maybe not. Either way, it'll keep you alive, and that's all you really need. You squat in the corner of the shed, chipping ice off the salted fish. Your fingers are numb, your breath hangs in the air, and the smell... Well, let's just say your nose stopped complaining 2 minutes ago. This is winter survival in its purest form. Salt. Not the fancy flaky stuff you see in glass jars on kitchen counters today. No, this is coarse grey, crusty salt. Harvested from evaporated seawater or dug up in hunks from the earth, traded like treasure, and worth more than gold on a bad year. You rub a bit between your fingers. It crunches like sand, and it's saved your life more times than you can count. Salt wasn't seasoning. Salt was preservation. In the medieval world, there were no refrigerators, no vacuum sealing, no freezers. If you wanted meat in winter, you had to salt it in summer. Fish, pork, even cabbage got layered with salt to draw out moisture and keep the rot at bay. You lived and died by what you could store, and salt made that possible. The salt fish in front of you has the texture of old wood and the colour of despair, but it's food. After a good soak and some boiling, it'll be chewy but edible. Probably you've eaten worse. You remember helping pack it months ago. The whole family joined in. gutting, cleaning, salting, layering, like an assembly line from a fever dream. Your uncle made bad jokes the whole time. Something about salt-cured souls. You didn't laugh then, but you smile now, teeth chattering. Scholars remain divided on how widespread salt preservation was among the lowest classes. Some say it was a luxury. Others claim even poor families salted their harvests and meats when they could. What's clear is that every village had at least one communal storehouse for salted food, if only to avoid mass starvation when snow came early. Your hands hurt now, the cold biting into your bones. You drop the fish into a pot of water to soak, hoping it rehydrates before supper. The fire crackles nearby, already laced with the scent of dung and last night's soup bones. You tuck the salt bag back into its wooden box, guarding it like gold. Because it might as well be. Salt also had other uses. You've seen it poured in a circle to keep spirits out. The old woman across the stream swears it cures toothaches. You tried it once, packing a pinch into an aching molar. It helped. Or maybe the pain just gave up. Some say too much salt is dangerous. Others say not enough is worse. In this world, you learn moderation by trial and extremely salty error. One time, your cousin oversalted the stew and the dog refused to touch it, and the dog licks its own feet. Modern folks might complain about sodium levels, but you laugh through chapped lips. Your body craves salt like the earth craves rain. It's in your soup, your skin, your sweat, your survival. You take a little pinch and flick it into the fire. Just a habit, maybe superstition, maybe thanks. You don't question it. The fish still looks like punishment, but you know it'll soften soon. You've got some barley saved, maybe a bit of onion. Enough for a meal. And with that thought, you lean back, fingers stinging, belly growling, salt still crusted under your nails. The wind cuts through the cracks in the cottage like a thief, stealing warmth from your bones. You tug your blanket higher, but it doesn't help much. The walls are thin, the windows are just oiled parchment stretched over wooden frames, and the fire has burned down to sullen embers. It's cold, bitterly cold. But somehow, your bed is warm, because you've mastered one of the simplest and most underrated survival tricks of the medieval world: insulation by body heat. You're not sleeping alone, of course. No one does. Your siblings are crammed in beside you, your cousin is using your shoulder as a pillow, and someone's elbow is very firmly in your spine. But together, you're warm. You can feel the heat radiating under the heap of wool and hay and patched linens. This isn't just a family bed. It's a furnace of human survival. Beneath you is a mattress of sorts, but it's not stuffed with feathers or foam. No, it's filled with straw. Clean, dry straw if you're lucky, mouldy and mouse-nibbled if you're not. You remember stuffing it yourself in the autumn, packing handfuls into the sack while your cousin insisted on testing the mattress by diving into it face first. He got a nose full of grass seed. You got a good laugh. Hay-stuffed bedding was common throughout medieval Europe. It was cheap, replaceable, and surprisingly effective at trapping heat. The straw formed pockets of air that kept warmth from escaping into the cold, hard floor. Some people added herbs like lavender or wormwood to repel fleas and improve the smell. You tried that once, but now it just smells like smoked rosemary and wet dog. You roll over and hear the soft crunch-crunch of flattened straw shifting beneath you. The sound is oddly soothing, like a lullaby made of farm chores. Modern beds are too quiet, you think. Too clean. Too soft. You'd probably sink into one and disappear like a potato in a stew. Scholars still debate how often straw bedding was changed. Some sources say monthly, others say yearly. You say, when the mice start raising a family in it, it's time. And it's not just the mattress. Every inch of your sleeping setup is designed to trap heat. Your blanket is a thick woolen monstrosity that smells vaguely of goat smoke and onions. Over that, there's an old cloak. Underneath, you've layered your second-best tunic, a frayed apron, and someone's abandoned baby shawl. You'd wear the fire if you could. And forget pillows. You've got a sack of dried peas under your head. It's lumpy, but at least it keeps your neck at the right angle so your brain doesn't roll out one ear and onto the floor. Probably. The cold is relentless, but you're not defenseless. You've learned the tricks. You sleep facing your siblings, breathe through your nose to conserve warmth, and tuck your feet into the stomach of whoever's closest. They kick, of course, but then they do the same to you. It's mutual abuse and mutual survival. Some nights, you wake up with frost on the inside of the walls. Not outside, inside. That's when you know it's serious. You keep your boots near the fire, but they still freeze stiff overnight. Once, your sock froze to the floor. You had to rip it off and walk barefoot across the cottage like a medieval ice dancer. Still, when the sun rises and the chill seeps away, you feel proud. You survived another night. Not comfortably, not glamorously, but effectively. And you didn't freeze your toes off. Yet. Your cousin mumbles in his sleep, burrows deeper into the hay. Someone snores. The fire hisses, and you close your eyes, letting the warmth of shared breath and ancient straw pull you back into sleep. It's mid-morning now, and you step carefully outside, boots crunching over frost-hardened mud. You've done the water, the fire, the morning brew, and now nature calls. Not figuratively, literally, because you, brave medieval soul that you are, need to do your business. And there's no porcelain throne waiting for you. No scented candles. No magazine rack. What you have is moss. You shuffle off behind the cottage toward your usual spot. A short walk past the compost pile and the suspiciously angry-looking goat. There's a small wooden board leaned against a tree marking your territory. You lift it and crouch like you've done 100 times before, feet wide for balance, cloak pushed aside, hands braced on your knees like a determined wrestler in a hay-smelling tournament. For wiping, forget paper. That's for monks and royalty. You've got a few choices. Smooth stones, too cold today, dried corn husks, scratchy and scarce, or the perennial favourite, moss, thick, spongy and conveniently abundant around your hut. You reach for a handful, soft and damp like a nature-crafted towel, surprisingly gentle, a little ticklish, maybe a bit too natural if a beetle's still clinging to it, but effective. In fact, moss was widely used in medieval Europe as a cleaning material. Its absorbency made it perfect for bandages, diapers, and yes, toilet use. You even recall your grandmother telling you once that moss from birch trees was the fanciest kind, the silk of the forest, she called it with a proud grin. You chuckle remembering that despite the current situation. The forest around you is hushed. The birds are mostly silent and only the wind seems to care what you're doing. There's a certain freedom to it. No cues, no flush, just you and the trees, and then a sneeze. Behind you. Human? You nearly fall forward. You whip around, adjusting your tunic in panic, and find your cousin grinning at you like an imp with a secret. Just checking if the moss is fresh, he jokes. You throw a clump at him. It misses, but the threat is enough. He vanishes with a laugh, leaving you muttering threats under your breath and adjusting what dignity you have left. Sanitation in the medieval world was a creative endeavour. Many households had nothing but a pit latrine out back, or in some places a wooden board with a hole cut into it balanced over a stream. Castles had garderobes, stone or wooden protrusions that let waste drop into a moat or pit below. But for peasants like you, it's all about routine, resourcefulness, and resisting the urge to lean back too far. You remember the village festival last autumn, when someone, probably drunk on weak pear cider, tried to invent a portable privy by placing a bucket inside a basket and carrying it around like a throne. It tipped. There was screaming, and a year later, people still talk about it. Experts still debate how hygienic medieval toileting habits really were. Some claim rural communities were healthier than crowded cities due to better ventilation and composting practices. Others argue parasites and disease were rampant regardless. One thing's certain. You know to keep your moss hand separate from your eating hand, and that knowledge alone puts you ahead of a surprising number of people in history. Back inside, you rinse your hands with a splash of cold, greyish water. No soap, just sand and friction. It stings, but you've felt worse. You dry them on your cloak, which has officially become your everything cloth. Scarf, towel, blanket, emergency rope, and impromptu curtain. Despite the indignity, you've grown used to it. There's something oddly grounding about your daily trip to the loo bush. You know the moss you like, the spot with the best view, even which stump to lean on if your knees are feeling rebellious. Modern life promises convenience, but out here you get intimacy. Not in the romantic sense, heaven forbid, but in the raw, connected sense. You're part of the land. You feed it. It feeds you. Literally. Sometimes uncomfortably literally. You gather a few extra tufts of moss before heading back. Always good to have a supply. You tuck them in a dry spot near the hearth when you return, where the heat will crisp them up. They'll be warm for the next visit, like the medieval version of a heated seat. You exhale slowly, letting the tension in your back ease. Your chores await, your belly grumbles, and there's laundry to wrangle. But for a fleeting moment, you feel oddly proud. You, medieval moss wiper, are doing just fine. You crouch near the hearth, your fingers blackened with soot, and pull out a small greasy pouch tied with twine. Inside is your toothbrush, or, well, the closest thing you have to one, a worn twig charred slightly at one end and a pinch of fine grey powder, ash. You dip the twig into the ash and begin scrubbing your teeth with practiced ease. The taste is bitter, a little chalky and oddly familiar. You've been doing this for years. It's not glamorous, it's not minty, but it gets the job done. And more importantly, it keeps your teeth from falling out, at least for now. Tooth care in the medieval world wasn't entirely the disaster some modern folks imagine. True, there were no floss picks or electric brushes, but people did care about oral hygiene. In many villages, chewing sticks were common, twigs from specific trees, especially those with antiseptic properties like birch, hazel, or even ash. You happen to favour willow. It has a slight tang and doesn't splinter too badly. The powder, it's homemade, a blend of charcoal, crushed salt, and the fine ash left over from cooking fires. Sometimes you add dried mint or sage when you have it, but that's a luxury. The goal is simple. Scrub off the film of barley porridge and roasted turnips clinging to your teeth after every meal. You look up and grin at the smoky window. Your teeth aren't exactly sparkling, but they're there, and they don't hurt. That's more than some villagers can say. You've seen your cousin cry for a week over a toothache that ended with the village blacksmith yanking it out using hot tongs and no small amount of alcohol. That memory alone keeps you scrubbing. Scholars remain divided on how common daily tooth cleaning was among peasants. Some historical records mention mouth rinses, herbal pastes, and even early versions of mouthwash made from vinegar or wine. But others argue it was a luxury practice limited to monks and nobility. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. People did what they could, with what they had, when the pain became unbearable. You remember the old healer's warning, bad teeth rot the mind. You're not sure if that's medically accurate, but it scared you enough as a child to never skip a scrub. She also claimed chewing juniper bark could cure heartbreak and toothaches alike. Jury's still out on that one. After a few minutes, your gums tingle, partly from the coarse ash, partly from the vigorous scrubbing. You spit into the fire, it sizzles dramatically. You feel oddly triumphant. In town, the apothecary sells tiny cloth sachets of imported powders, ground coral, dried fennel, powdered bone. Too expensive for you. But you did once trade a smoked eel for a pouch of sweet-smelling tooth dust. It lasted a week. Then you went back to ash and birch twig, muttering that eel wasn't worth the smell in your cottage for 3 days. As you wipe your mouth with your sleeve, you think about your future self. Older, maybe hunched, maybe more toothless. You hope not. You've avoided sweets, not that you had much choice. Honey is rare and sugar is mythical, the kind of thing bishops get sent in barrels and pretend not to hoard. Your stomach growls, reminding you it's time for lunch. Maybe a little oat gruel, maybe that saltfish you soaked earlier. Either way, it'll be hard on your teeth. You roll your jaw, grateful for the ones that remain. Modern folks might grimace at the thought of brushing with ash, but hey! Your breath doesn't smell like a battlefield. You take pride in that. Some say the ash even whitens the enamel, though mostly it just grinds off the outer layer and everything attached to it. Practical, if brutal. You stash your brush in its pouch, hang it on a wooden peg, and nod to yourself in the smoky mirror, a polished bit of metal nailed to the wall. You smile. One more thing handled, one more day survived. The sky is still grey when you grab the bucket and head toward the edge of the thatched roof. A steady drip is falling from the eaves, each drop plinking into the wooden trough you've carved over seasons of practice. Rainwater, precious, unpredictable, and absolutely vital. There's no plumbing here, no faucets, no pipes, no running tap. Your entire water supply depends on what the clouds feel like doing this week, and when they're generous, you work fast. You adjust the slanted gutter, a hollowed-out log blackened with time, so it pours into your storage barrel. Already half full. That's a blessing. A full barrel means you don't have to haul buckets from the stream half a mile away, where the cows bathe and the frogs lay their jelly eggs. You watch the water ripple in the barrel, then skim off a floating twig with your finger. There's always something in it. Leaves, dirt, the occasional beetle. You've learned to see past that. The water's clear enough once it settles, And besides, you're going to boil it anyway. Medieval villagers like you relied on roof catchment and surface runoff long before it became an eco-trend. Thatched roofs made of straw or reeds worked surprisingly well for collection, though you had to avoid drinking the first flush, the initial water after a long dry spell full of bird droppings, dust and things better left unmentioned. You've even added a little trick over the years, a cloth cover stretched across the top of the barrel, held down by rocks. It catches bigger debris. When the cloth gets too dirty, you just rinse it in the stream, unless it's winter, in which case you chip the ice with a stick and curse in 4 different dialects. The barrel is one of your proudest possessions. You helped carve the slats yourself, tightening them with fire-heated iron bands and sealing the seams with a mixture of beeswax and pine resin. It leaks sometimes, but it holds, like you. Experts still debate how widespread rooftop water collection was in peasant households. Some argue it was a luxury reserved for monasteries and towns. Others point to archaeological evidence of simple gutter systems and cisterns in rural homes. You don't care about the scholarly squabble. You care about staying hydrated. You carry the full bucket back into the cottage, carefully stepping over the muddy threshold. The floor inside is dirt, of course, packed hard by years of footsteps, but you've covered it near the door with bits of flat stone, more for morale than practicality. Wet floors get slippery, and you've already slipped twice this week. The bruise on your backside has its own personality now. Inside, you pour the rainwater into a clay jug, then set it near the hearth to warm slightly. Cold water shocks your teeth. You learned that the hard way last winter, when a sharp gulp made your molar throb for 3 straight days. You take a sip, slightly earthy, a hint of leaf mould, but refreshing, and most importantly not pulled from the same trough where your neighbour's duck enjoys bathing. You think about all the things you do without thinking, checking the sky, adjusting the gutter, skimming the surface. It's a rhythm now, like breathing, like survival. You glance up. The roof is dripping steadily, maybe enough to fill the second barrel if the rain holds. That one's for laundry and washing, not drinking. You're civilised after all. Kind of. Some people use that water for soaking beans or rinsing wounds. You just use it to splash your face in the morning, hoping the shock wakes you up faster than yesterday's cold porridge. You once heard a bard sing about crystal springs and fountains of the gods. You snorted into your stew. The real gods send you roof water, and you're thankful for every gritty drop. You look at the sky again, still grey, still dripping, and you smile. Because today, you won't have to drag that heavy yoke to the stream. You sit cross-legged by the fire pit poking at a crusty hunk of bread. It's gone tough, stale as timber, and smells faintly like wet socks left in a sunbeam. In the modern world, this would be destined for the compost bin, or maybe weaponised as a doorstop. But here, in your medieval kitchen, this is medicine. You crack the bread open and stare at the blue-green fuzz creeping through the middle. It's mouldy. Definitely. Maybe dangerously. But you're not planning to eat it. You're planning to use it. You reach for a rag, cleanish, as most things are, and gently wrap a chunk of the mouldy bread inside. Then you dip the whole thing into warm rainwater until it's soft and pliable. The smell is assertive. But once it's soaked, you squeeze out the excess liquid and press the soggy lump against the raw patch on your cousin's leg. She flinches, but she's used to it. Her shin's been weeping for days, a cut from the firewood pile that started looking angry and red. You tie the poultice on with twine and hope for the best. Using mouldy bread as a treatment for infected wounds wasn't just peasant witchcraft. Historical records show that folk medicine often leaned on available natural tools. Some of these remedies turned out to have real antibacterial properties. Notably, penicillin, one of the world's first antibiotics, was discovered in mould. So while you're not exactly holding a breakthrough in your hand, you're not completely off base either. Scholars remain divided on how widespread or intentional this practice was. Some argue peasants recognised the healing effects of certain moulds through experience. Others think it was just desperation and dumb luck. But when you don't have access to physicians, or when the nearest one charges 3 hens just to look at you, you get creative. Your cousin grumbles, then mutters a thank you through gritted teeth. You nod and sit back, stretching your sore legs. The cottage is still smoky from the morning's dung fire, and your hands smell like mildew and vinegar. But there's something satisfying about doing something when most wounds just fester. You once saw the blacksmith try to treat a burn by rubbing goose fat on it, then sprinkling ashes. It worked. kind of. The burn healed. So did the smell, eventually. You remember another strange recipe from the midwife's book. Wine-soaked bread with crushed garlic, applied warm. Or honey mixed with ground oak bark. You've tried both. The garlic made your eyes water, and the honey just made you sticky enough to attract every fly within a 5-mile radius. Still, the bread poultice is your go-to. It's soft, simple, and somehow comforting. There's a strange dignity in it. In a world with no sterile bandages or gauze rolls, you use what you have. You reach for the rest of the loaf and pick off the clean parts. No sense wasting it entirely. You'll dry them near the fire and crumble the crumbs into tomorrow's porridge. Or feed them to the chickens, who, by the way, seem utterly unbothered by mould. Modern folks with their medicine cabinets would be horrified. Antiseptic sprays, sterile packaging, digital thermometers. You, by contrast, rely on smell, colour, and whether or not the wound starts smelling like a cheese gone rogue. But the strange thing is, it often works. Not always, not cleanly, but often enough to count. You glance down at your cousin's leg. She's already fallen asleep, blanket pulled up to her chin, breath slow and even. Maybe it's the warmth, maybe it's the bread, maybe it's both. You lean back against the wall, hands resting on your knees. The fire crackles softly. Somewhere outside, the chickens gossip, and you sit there, smelling faintly of rot and herbs, knowing that even in a world of dirt floors and dung smoke, you're doing your best to heal the people you love. The sun peeks through the clouds just enough to light the edge of your cottage wall. It's going to be a warm day. Well, warm enough, which means one thing, time to get dirty, on purpose. You duck behind the cottage, scoop a flat board into the ground near your herb patch, and dig your fingers into a clay pot. Inside is your secret weapon against sunburn, wind chap, and that weird rash you once got from cuddling a sheep with questionable hygiene. It's mud. Specifically, a mixture of clay-rich soil, crushed charcoal, a bit of pig fat, and a dash of vinegar. Thick, sticky, and faintly vinegary. You dip 2 fingers in and smear a stripe along your cheekbone. Cool and a little gritty. Welcome to medieval sunblock. You might not have SPF rating zinc sticks or soothing aloe gels, but you've got what your ancestors had. Earth. A thin layer of mud not only cools your skin under a burning sun, it protects it. The layer of clay reflects harsh light, traps moisture, and keeps your skin from blistering under the relentless sun. And when you sweat, it doesn't sting your eyes like modern lotion, unless you got the vinegar ratio wrong again. You remember the first time you saw a travelling mason do it. He was shirtless, covered in clay like a statue halfway carved. He told you the mud protected his skin and kept the demons out. You've skipped the demon part, but you've kept the habit. Every summer, every harvest season, every long walk to the neighbouring village, you armour your skin with dirt. Experts still debate whether peasants widely used mud for skin protection, or if it was more of a labourer's trick. Some believe it started with shepherds and field hands who spent all day exposed, while others argue it was a natural evolution of healing traditions, clay being used to treat boils, rashes and sunscald alike. Either way, it works, and that's all that matters when you're bent over a field for 12 hours under an uncaring sky. You smear a bit more across your forehead and neck, careful to avoid your eyes. Then you rub the excess on the back of your hands. You'll be hauling water, pulling weeds and chasing chickens by noon. You'll need it. There's something oddly comforting about the ritual, like armour but softer, like putting on a second skin. And when it dries into a crackled mask, you don't even flinch. The kids say you look like a ghost or a baked potato. You take that as a compliment. You remember a neighbour who swore by white clay from the riverbank, said it made her skin smooth as butter. You tried it once, but it gave you a rash and made your brother scream when he saw you at dawn. You stick with your own mix now. Sometimes, when there's no charcoal, you substitute with crushed walnut shells, or ashes from the fire, though those tend to make you smell like regret. It's a flexible recipe. Some folks add herbs. Thyme for scent, mint for cooling, sage for good luck. You once added lavender, and it attracted every bee in the parish. You glance at the goats, now grazing lazily in the field. Even they seem to respect the mud. Probably because one of them once tried licking it off your leg and got a mouthful of vinegar. He hasn't looked you in the eye since. Back inside, you check your reflection in a polished tin pan. You look tribal, fierce, slightly ridiculous, but ready. Because today you'll be out in the garden, your face to the sky, Your hands in the dirt, your back hunched like a half-melted candle, and when the sun beats down, you won't burn. You'll just bake slowly, like a loaf of bread with opinions. You grab your hat, wide-brimmed straw and half-chewed by a goose last summer, and head outside. The sun glares, but your face is cool, your skin protected. And if the neighbours gossip about the mud streaks down your arms, let them. You know something they've forgotten. The earth does protect you, if you let it. You sweep your foot gently across the packed dirt floor, scattering a thin trail of ash along the base of the cottage wall. Not because it's dirty, well it is, but because it's part of your daily cleaning ritual. In a world without tile, linoleum, or even wooden boards for most peasants, your floor is earth. Just earth. And keeping it clean, that takes strategy. You reach into the hearth and scoop out a handful of fine, cool ash, what's left from the previous night's dung and wood fire. You sprinkle it across the floor like powdered snow, sweeping gently with a bundle of birch twigs tied together by a fraying bit of cord. It doesn't seem like much, but this dusty ritual is part of what keeps disease and filth at bay. Ash is a natural disinfectant. It absorbs odours, deters fleas and lice, and dries up spills, be it soup, candle drips, or the occasional toddler mishap, and you don't waste it. Every bit that isn't used for teeth or soap finds its way to the floor or the privy pit. You sweep in slow, circular motions, pushing soot and crumbs and the occasional mouse dropping into a wide ceramic bowl at the corner. The rhythm of it is almost meditative. Sweep, shift, sprinkle. It's not clean by modern standards, of course, but it's the best you can do with what you've got. You learned this from your grandmother, who learned it from hers. She always said, "A floor that's swept daily won't grow legs of its own." You didn't understand that as a child, until you saw a clump of food left too long under the bed sprout its own colony of mushrooms. Now you sweep religiously. Some days you even add a handful of crushed dried mint or wormwood into the ash. The mint sweetens the air, and the wormwood repels fleas. It's your own little peasant potpourri. Not quite spa-like, but better than living in a hovel that smells like foot stew and burnt goat hair. Scholars remain divided on how much effort medieval peasants actually put into cleanliness. Romanticised sources paint them as filthy, lice-ridden swamp goblins. But archaeological evidence of swept floors, maintained hearths, and even drainage channels in poorer homes suggests a different story. People cared. They had to. A filthy home could breed disease faster than a butcher's bucket in July. You shake out your broom, really more of a bundle of hope at this point, and place it beside the door. You'll use it again before nightfall. Dust settles constantly here. You breathe it, eat it, sleep in it. But you push back. A little sweep each day. A small defence against chaos. In the corner near the fire, you keep a flat stone where you place food. It's cleaner than putting it directly on the dirt, and the warmth from the hearth keeps things from freezing in winter. That stone's been passed down for generations. You've scrubbed it with vinegar, ash and elbow grease more times than you can count. You even have a routine for your feet. Before bed, you wipe them with a damp cloth, then rub a bit of ash into the soles. It keeps them dry and supposedly deters foot rot. You're not sure if that's true, but your feet haven't rebelled yet. Outside, the pig squeals. You sigh. Probably dug up the onion patch again, but inside your little earthen kingdom is clean. By medieval standards, at least. You stretch your back, wipe your hands on your apron and smile faintly. You're not fighting for sparkle. You're fighting for survival, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of peace under your toes. So, next time someone mocks your ash-covered floor, let them live a week in your shoes. Then ask them how they feel about sweeping dirt with twigs and dignity. You'll be here, keeping the hearth lit and the ground beneath you just clean enough to matter. You crouch beside the larder shelf, eyeing the contents of your wooden bowl. Dried peas, a hunk of yesterday's crusty bread, and a handful of lentils that may or may not have seen better days. There's no meat in sight. Not today, not yesterday, and not for the next, let's say, many days. But that's not unusual. In fact, it's tradition. Today isn't a fast day, technically, but you're observing it anyway, like most villagers do. Not because you're especially pious, though the local priest might disagree, but because meat is rare, precious, and subject to all sorts of rules. The church calendar has over 150 fasting days each year, and on those days meat is off the table, literally and spiritually. That leaves you with grains, legumes, roots, and the occasional miracle if a neighbour drops off an egg. You toss the lentils into a pot with water Add a pinch of salt and stir with a wooden spoon that's older than your cousin's mysterious rash. The fire simmers gently beneath the pot. You toss in some onion peel and a wilted sprig of thyme. Not gourmet, but it fills the belly. The church's fasting laws are more than religious regulation. They shape your diet entirely. Wednesdays, Fridays, Lent, Advent. So many days are meatless that you've become an expert at surviving on whatever doesn't have a face. Sometimes fish is allowed, but that assumes you live near water or have a coin to spare for salted herring. You don't. So you rely on the humble lentil, the peasant's pearl. You remember the festival last spring when a visiting monk gave a sermon about the virtues of hunger. You nearly fell asleep standing, but he wasn't wrong. Hunger makes you creative. You've mashed turnips into patties, stewed cabbage until it weeps, and once made a surprisingly decent fake sausage from mashed oats, leeks, and pig fat scraped from a pan. You still dream about that one. Scholars remain divided on whether medieval fasting practices improved health or made people more vulnerable to illness due to protein deficiency. Some argue the abundance of legumes balanced the diet. Others believe the constant cycling between feast and famine wore down immunity. You're not a scholar, you're just tired of beans. Still, there's something oddly peaceful about this rhythm. You know when the meat is coming, a festival, a wedding, or a particularly unfortunate rooster, and when it does, you savour every bite. But most days it's plant-based by default. You stir the pot again, watching bubbles rise through the thickening lentil stew. The scent is earthy, a little sour, but not unpleasant. You break off a bit of bread, dunk it in and chew slowly. It's chewy, toothsome, and fine. You think about how today's folk chase after vegan trends and plant-forward diets. You smile to yourself. You've been doing that for years, out of necessity. No blender, no oat milk, no imported avocados. Just you, your pot, and a modest hope that the dried peas actually softened this time. You glance over at your neighbour's house. She's likely boiling carrots again, pretending it's stew. Last week she added wild garlic and called it herbal broth. You traded her a few onions for the recipe. It wasn't bad. Not great, but not bad. Sometimes you envy the chickens. They eat worms with abandon. But then again, you've never seen a chicken wince at a beet soup disaster. You finish your bowl, wipe it with the last piece of crust and feel, if not full, then at least no longer empty. You'll save the rest of the pot for supper. Maybe thicken it with barley, maybe not. This is survival, quiet, humble and meatless, and weirdly it suits you. You stand at the cottage door, bundling yourself up for the day's labour. There's a nip in the air, not quite winter's bite, but definitely not summer's kiss either. You pull on a second tunic, then a third, wriggling your arms through stiff woolen sleeves. The layers don't match, the stitching is uneven, and the outer one smells faintly like pickled herring. But you're ready to face the cold the way every medieval peasant does, by faking a coat. Coats are expensive. Real ones, fur-lined waxed canvas or thick dyed wool, are out of your reach. So you do what the clever do. You layer until the world can't tell whether you're warm or just extremely round. 3 tunics, 1 apron and a scarf stitched from an old bedsheet. You look like a bale of hay with opinions. Still, it works. Each tunic traps air between the layers, and each layer holds just enough warmth to keep your core from turning into frozen porridge. You tuck the edges into a rope belt, cinching your waist tight. If you're lucky, you'll sweat a little. If you're unlucky, you'll freeze before you start shoveling the dung pile. You remember watching your father do this every morning, grumbling, twisting, swearing softly as he forced his arms through sleeves that had shrunk with age and rain. He used to say, "Every peasant's coat is made of lies and leftover cloth." You didn't get it then. You do now. Experts still debate how much access the average villager had to quality outerwear. Some argue that peasants occasionally pooled resources for shared winter gear. Others suggest layering was the norm. Less about fashion, more about simple thermodynamics. Either way, you've made it an art. Your best tunic, the one on top, was patched last spring with scraps from your mother's apron. It has a hole under the arm, which you've learned to ignore. The inner one, it's stiff with old sweat, but no one's seeing it anyway. It's basically your second skin. The third is a hand-me-down from your cousin's cousin, originally meant for a child, so you wear it short like a poorly fitted vest. Somehow it all works together, and there's something oddly empowering about it. Like armour. Sure, it itches. Sure, the layers don't breathe and your armpits feel like stewed cabbage. But when you step outside and the wind slaps your face, it doesn't make it past your second rib. Victory. You shuffle out into the yard, boots squelching in the mud. The neighbour waves, bundled in what looks like a curtain and 2 fur-lined socks stitched together into a hat. You nod, solidarity and discomfort. Everyone here knows the rules. If you can't afford a coat, you become one. You pass the field boundary where the wind picks up. It tugs at your sleeves like a greedy ghost, but you're sealed tight. Your layers rustle but don't surrender. You bend, start pulling weeds, and feel the sweat building within moments. That's the trade-off. Warmth or movement. Never both. Midday comes. The sun glimmers briefly through the haze. You sit for a moment under a crooked tree, peeling off one layer and flapping it to let in a little air. A breeze tickles your back. You shiver, then laugh. Because you've survived another morning, without a coat, without complaint. Well, minimal complaint. You sip from your water jug, lukewarm rainwater, now tasting slightly of wool from the mouth of the jug rubbing against your sleeve. Still refreshing, still yours. You stretch your legs, crack your back, and pull the tunic back on. One layer at a time, like armour, like strategy. You may not look elegant, you may not smell great, but you are unquestionably warm, and that's what matters. You're squatting beside the herb patch just past midday, tongue pressed against the roof of your mouth, silently judging your own breath. It's complicated. A blend of lentils, onion, possibly despair. Not the worst it's ever been, but not ideal. You reach into your pouch and pull out a crumpled handful of leaves. Wild parsley, dried mint and a sprig of sage. Time for your midday mint. No chewing gum, no peppermint sprays. Just raw, wild plants, nibbled and mashed into something resembling fresh breath. It's less about smelling good and more about not smelling offensive. And in a world where personal space is measured in inches, that's important. You pop the herbs into your mouth and chew slowly. The sage is bitter. The mint is faint, more memory than flavour. But it works, sort of. Your mouth feels a little less like a turnip pit now. In the medieval world, oral hygiene wasn't just about brushing. It was about masking, neutralising and managing your body's more expressive aromas. Chewing herbs was one of the most accessible ways to do that, especially in rural areas where cloves and cinnamon were fantasies sold in distant markets to richer, better-smelling people. You remember watching your grandmother chew on fennel seeds after every meal, said it kept her breath sweet enough to greet angels. You weren't sure whether angels cared about halitosis, but she lived to nearly 90, so you follow her lead. Scholars still debate how widespread herbal chewing was in rural populations. Some claim it was a monastic or noble habit that trickled down through folk practice. Others argue that chewing parsley, sage, or even raw celery was common across Europe, as much a health aid as a social courtesy. You pluck another stem from the garden, rubbing the leaf between your fingers to release the oils. It smells green, sharp, almost soapy. You tuck it into your cheek like a tobacco plug, letting the juice seep across your tongue. Your neighbour once claimed that chewing marjoram would make you irresistible to widows. You tried it. All it made you was gassy. Still, he swore by it, said his second wife had loved his breath so much she married him to shut it up. There's a small clay pot by your door where you keep drying herbs. You refill it often, mint in spring, fennel in summer, thyme in autumn. In winter it's mostly dried apple skins and pine needles, which don't help much but give your mouth something to do. You also keep a piece of chewed licorice root tied to your belt. Not for flavour, it's awful, but for occasional gnawing when you feel your breath could curdle milk at 10 paces. You've seen others chew on charcoal, especially after meals heavy on garlic or onions. You tried that once. Looked like you'd eaten soot pie. Effective? Maybe. Dignified? Not in the slightest. You chew slowly, staring into the midday light. A fly buzzes past your ear. You swat lazily. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays as if mocking your herbal experiment. But you smile, because despite it all, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no minty gels, you've found a rhythm. You can talk to others without making them recoil. You can stand close in a chapel pew without inspiring silent prayers for ventilation. And there's something almost luxurious in this simplicity. No packaging, no plastic, just you and the plants, sharing a quiet agreement. I chew you. You make me less terrible. You rinse your mouth with a sip of tepid water and spit into the weeds. The aftertaste is sharp, herbal, oddly comforting. Like you've licked a monk's herb garden. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve and breathe out slowly. Better, much better. And just in time too, your cousin's walking up the path. You smile at him, confidently this time, not because your teeth are perfect, they're not, but because your breath doesn't smell like last week's porridge. Survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about smelling just decent enough to get through the day. You step back into the cottage just as the sun begins to dip, painting long shadows across the walls. The flies are back, as always, and you wave them off with a weary hand. Time to get ready for nightfall, which means one thing: lighting the evening fire, not for light or warmth this time, but to smoke the bugs out. You grab a bundle of herbs, mostly dried mugwort, some rosemary, and a pinch of lavender for optimism, and toss them onto the still glowing coals. A curl of fragrant smoke rises immediately, curling through the rafters and slipping around the beams like a sleepy spirit. Then you add the main course, a thin pat of dung, carefully dried, placed just right to smoulder and not flame. Within minutes, the cottage is cloaked in a fine, smoky haze. It stings your eyes a little and makes your nose itch, but it's worth it. Because as the smoke thickens, the mosquitoes vanish, the midges flee. Even the bold houseflies, the ones who survive your constant swatting, begin to lose interest. You can almost hear their tiny, angry coughs as they retreat. This is your evening routine, a kind of peasant incense ritual, not to summon spirits, but to keep the crawling, biting world at bay. And it works. Mostly. In the medieval world, smoke was one of the few tools people had to combat pests. The same fire that cooked your porridge also doubled as a defence system against lice, fleas and flying nuisances. Herbs were added not just for the smell, but for their insect-repelling oils. Some even rubbed garlic on their skin or stuffed wild rue into their tunics. You tried that once. You smelled like a haunted stew pot for 3 days. Scholars remain divided on whether medieval people understood the connection between smoke and disease control. Some argue it was purely comfort-driven. Others suggest it reflected a primitive, intuitive grasp of sanitation long before germ theory. Either way, you don't need science to tell you that fewer bites means fewer infections and better sleep. You lean back on your heels, watching the rafters haze over. The smoke clings to everything. The beams, the walls, your clothes. Your hair smells like burnt hay and rosemary. Your eyes water a bit, but again, it's better than scratching all night. You remember the summer a flea bite turned into a festering wound on your cousin's calf. It puffed up, then split open like an overripe fig. The village healer said it was bad air, and maybe she was right. Ever since then, you've been vigilant about smoke. In fact, when you go to sleep tonight, you'll do it with a small clay bowl of smouldering herbs near the door. Not close enough to ignite anything, of course, though your brother once managed that feat with a spilled candle and a sheepskin. You still blame the hole in the floor on that incident. You glance at the ceiling, black with years of soot. The rafters wear a permanent veil of grey. You once tried scrubbing them with vinegar and a brush, but the brush caught fire from the embers below, and now you just let it be. It's part of the home's flavour, smoky, rustic, vaguely flammable, and there's an odd beauty in the ritual, watching the smoke curl and rise, smelling the shifting tones, pungent, then earthy, then herbal. It's hypnotic, like watching clouds gather inside your own home. You swear you saw a shape form once, a goose, or maybe St. Cuthbert with a feather duster. You open the door for a moment to let some of the denser smoke drift out. Just enough so you don't wake up choking. Then you shut it tight, wedge the cloth beneath the crack and nod in satisfaction. The bugs are gone, the air is heavy, and your tunic now smells less like you and more like smoked thyme, which is honestly an upgrade. You lie down on the straw bedding, eyes half-lidded, listening to the fire sigh. Somewhere a beetle scuttles for cover. Not tonight, little friend. This cottage belongs to the smoke now. You step out barefoot into the early evening chill, toes curling in the damp soil. The grass is wet. Not dew, just lingering rain and the general sogginess of life in a medieval village. You should be wearing your boots, but sometimes you leave them inside. Not because you're careless, but because of an old habit passed down like a whispered superstition, grounding yourself to the earth, feeling it, trusting it. You begin your slow walk down the path toward the edge of the garden, feet finding their own rhythm across the uneven terrain. The pebbles pinch, the cold seeps in, and your soles throb with each step. But strangely, you like it. You need it. This is how your ancestors did it, connecting with the land not just spiritually but physically, skin to soil. Medieval people often walked barefoot by necessity. Shoes were precious, often reserved for long travel or special occasions, and even when you had them, they weren't much more than leather flaps tied with string. On wet days like this, they did little but trap the damp. So many folks simply accepted what the earth offered. Direct contact. You recall the tales your grandmother used to tell, how barefoot walking bled the sickness into the dirt. You didn't understand it then, but as you age, you begin to see what she meant. There's a strange kind of honesty in it. No barrier, no filter. You against the world, unbuffered. Some scholars believe this idea, what modern folks now call earthing or grounding, has actual benefits. They cite improved circulation, muscle stimulation, even psychological calm. Others scoff, chalking it up to peasant pragmatism. But when your boots are soaked and your spirits are low, walking barefoot through the field feels like medicine. The mud squishes under your heel, warm in places, cool in others. A flat stone sends a tiny shock up your spine. A twig cracks. A slug brushes your toe. You don't flinch. You've seen worse. You pass the herb garden where the mint grows thick, the stalks bending from the last rain. The smell rises as you brush past, damp and green and sharp. You kneel briefly, pressing your palm flat against the soil. Cool, grainy, alive. You look up at the fading light, soft golden clouds drifting above the tree line. This is the hour when the village quiets. The smith is done hammering, the goats have stopped yelling, and even the children are reduced to distant murmurs. It's your moment, just you and the earth and the rhythm of your breath. You remember last winter when frostbite nipped 3 toes off your neighbour. He wore damp shoes for days. Ever since then, you dry your boots by the fire and give your feet freedom when the air is kind. And today, the air is merciful. You take another slow lap around the garden. The soil remembers your prints. You pause to stretch your arches against a thick tree root, cracking your toes like knuckles. The world may be muddy, but you've learned to move through it. Heel first, soft steps like a fox with somewhere boring to be. You once met a wandering friar who claimed that barefoot walking connected him to the divine, that each stone was a prayer, each blade of grass a whisper from the saints. He also claimed his feet glowed in the moonlight. You doubted that part, but the rest stuck with you. You reach the cottage again, wiping your soles on the edge of the doorway. A quick splash from the rain barrel cleans the rest. Your feet are red and sore, but oddly invigorated. You'll sleep better tonight. The ache in your calves tells you so. Inside, the fire still crackles. Your boots sit neatly by the hearth, still drying. But your body feels lighter now, your mind steadier. You curl your toes in the straw and smile. Somewhere deep in the dirt, the land remembers you, and that's enough. You wake in the middle of the night again, not from the cold this time, nor from the baby's whimpering, but from a tightness in your chest. The cough has returned, dry and deep, the kind that echoes inside your ribs like a knock on a hollow door. You sit up slowly, breath shallow, trying not to wake anyone else. Not that they'd be surprised. Everyone's sick, it seems. Everyone's always just a little bit sick. You reach for the sack of grain beside the hearth. Not for food, but for leverage. You drag it over and lean your back against it, propping yourself up at an angle. It's rough, lumpy, but it does the trick. Lying flat only makes the cough worse. At least upright, you can breathe without feeling like your lungs are being strangled from the inside out. Sleeping upright is one of those strange medieval practices that sounds uncomfortable until you try it out of necessity. And then, oddly, it becomes comfort. Not luxury, not ease, but relief. A makeshift cure for everything from a cough to congested lungs, to what the healer ominously called bad humours of the chest. You remember your grandfather's tales of plague years, how entire families slept sitting, heads drooping like wilting flowers, bundled in every cloth they owned. He said it helped them survive, or at least gave them dignity in illness. Modern scholars still debate whether upright sleeping was intentional therapy or just the result of necessity. Crowded beds, overstuffed cottages, illness, discomfort. But what's undeniable is how common it was, especially during outbreaks. Even nobles with 4-post beds were sometimes depicted sleeping propped on bolsters or angled pallets. You adjust the shawl around your shoulders, already feeling the congestion ease just a little. Your cousin lies nearby, wheezing faintly through his nose, blanket clutched like a lifeline. You envy him, if only for the uninterrupted slumber. Your own dreams come in fragments now, half memories of dry fields and bitter herbs, and once, inexplicably, a talking pig offering tax advice. You sip from the cup near the fire, lukewarm herbal brew, mostly water with a pinch of dried horehound, and maybe a sliver of licorice root, bitter as envy. But it soothes. It coats your throat and dulls the edge of the next cough. You lean further back against the sack, finding a slightly less lumpy spot, and exhale slowly. You think of the midwife's warning again. Don't let the phlegm settle, or it'll root like mould in a barrel. Comforting. She also said garlic poultices on the chest help. You tried it last winter. The smell lingered until May, but you did survive. The room is quiet now, except for the fire's soft murmur and your own rhythmic breathing. The smoke from earlier still hangs faintly in the air, not enough to choke, just enough to feel like a blanket of its own. A blanket of smoke, hay, and old breath. Your thoughts drift, as they often do in these twilight hours. You wonder about cities, about monks in stone rooms with actual bolsters and someone to bring them broth. You imagine velvet cushions, feather-stuffed pillows, and someone saying, "There, there," with clean hands. But then you look around your humble cottage, your walls of wattle and daub, your rafter full of dried herbs, your family snoring in piles, and you feel oddly content. Because here, even upright, even coughing, you're alive, still here. You close your eyes again, hand resting on your chest. The fire snaps softly. The cough softens. You drift not into sleep exactly, but into something close, a half slumber, upright and aware, floating somewhere between now and morning. And that, in this world, is as close to peace as one gets. You sit on the stool by the door, rolling up the leg of your trousers slowly, gritting your teeth with each tug. Your shin is swollen, hot to the touch, and glowing faintly red beneath the skin. You can barely bend your knee without wincing. It's not the worst wound you've had, but it's stubborn, angry, inflamed. From the basket near the hearth, you pull out a cabbage. Not for eating, though the smell might suggest otherwise, but for healing. You peel off one large waxy leaf, rinse it quickly in the rain barrel, and then press it against your swollen shin, wrapping a linen strip around it to hold it in place. It's cold, wet, slightly slimy, but you know it works. Cabbage leaves have long been used in folk medicine for their anti-inflammatory properties. Peasants didn't have ointments or sterile gauze. They had what grew in their garden. And cabbage was a healer's secret weapon. Cheap, plentiful, and oddly effective. You press the leaf tighter. The pain pulses like a drumbeat under the surface, but within a few minutes the cooling sensation begins to settle it. A deep exhale slips from your lips. You remember the old midwife's instructions. Crush it gently with your thumb to release the juice, then wrap it warm, not cold. But today you don't have time for warming. Cold will do. You'll rewrap it later, with a leaf warmed on a flat stone by the fire. That helps draw out the bad humours, or so they say. Scholars remain divided on the true medicinal effects of cabbage. Some say the plant's mild anti-inflammatory compounds make it genuinely useful. Others dismiss it as peasant superstition wrapped in salad. You, however, have tested it. Sprains, bites, rashes, it works more often than not. And when it doesn't, it still feels like doing something. And something is better than nothing. You shift your weight, adjusting your leg on the stool, and glance at the other leaves drying nearby. Red cabbage is supposedly stronger, but green is what you have. You've used it for headaches too, pressed across the brow like a vegetable tiara. You've wrapped it on your sister's chest during a fever, and once, memorably, you tried placing it on a goat's infected hoof. The goat ate it, then sneezed on you. You smile faintly at the memory, despite the pain. You reach for another leaf, roll it between your palms, and press it to your shin again. The skin underneath throbs, but the leaf is doing its quiet, green work. Outside, someone's chopping wood. The rhythmic thud echoes through the walls. A chicken fusses near the window, but inside there's a strange serenity to your cabbage ritual. Simple, repetitive, soothing. You wonder how many modern folk would laugh at this. Probably all of them. But they've never been you, sitting in a smoky cottage with a leg that feels like it's full of boiling nettles and a cabbage that cost nothing but time and patience. You lean back slowly, resting your head against the rough beam behind you. The linen wrap holds the leaf in place. The fire pops quietly. You can smell stew from next door. And your leg, well, it still hurts. But it also feels just a little more manageable. Maybe tomorrow it'll be better. Maybe not. But today, you've done what you can, and that's enough. You stand behind the cottage, gripping a bucket in one hand, and a wool-wrapped bundle in the other. The bundle is laundry, shirts, aprons, 2 pairs of stockings, and what used to be a pillowcase before the goat discovered it. The bucket, not soap, not water, but urine. That's right, human urine. A pungent amber liquid you've been collecting all week. It's your secret weapon against filth, and today's the day to put it to work. You set the bucket beside the trough and unravel the bundle. Everything is grimy, sweat-stained and stiff. Normal. You dunk the linens into the trough, then pour in the urine, splashing it generously over the fabric. The smell is fierce, like vinegar and barnyard stew, but you've long stopped flinching. It's cleaning time. In the medieval world, soap was expensive and hard to come by. Peasants like you turned to what was free, plentiful, and surprisingly effective. Urine. Rich in ammonia, old urine acts as a natural bleaching and cleaning agent. It breaks down grease and grime, brightens linens, and helps remove those dark, sweaty patches that come from working in the fields day after day. You grab a paddle, just a flat piece of wood, and begin agitating the pile, swirling the garments like you're stirring a cauldron of peasant broth. The bubbles rise slowly. You keep your face turned to the breeze. Even you have limits. Modern people would recoil at this, but for centuries, chamber lye, as it was politely called, was an essential part of laundry. Some towns even had communal urine collection points. There were urine tax collectors. You once heard of a noblewoman who paid peasants for their week-old chamber pots, so long as they'd aged to a proper sting. Experts remain divided on how widely this practice was used across Europe. Some argue it was a last resort among the poorest classes. Others claim it was a routine method before commercial soap became common in the late Middle Ages. You don't care much about academic squabbles. You care about whether your only tunic doesn't smell like last week's soup. You stir the mix until your arms ache, then let the garments soak a bit longer while you fetch water from the barrel. When you return, you wring out the laundry and begin rinsing thoroughly. You'll do it 3 times if needed. The goal is clean, not marinated. As you work, a breeze picks up, flapping the drying line nearby. Yesterday's wash flutters gently in the sunlight, slightly stiff, slightly yellowed, but fresh enough. No one expects sparkling whites here. Just not offensive is good enough. You remember the time your cousin tried to shortcut the process by soaking his linens in the pond. They came out slimy and smelling of frog. You still tease him about it, especially when his shirt starts to ferment on hot days. You rinse the final item and wring it tight, hands red and raw from the work. Then you hang it on the line, pinning it with split twigs. A drop of water lands on your nose. It's either rinse water or a warning from the clouds. You glance up. Overcast but holding. Hopefully. The yard now smells interesting. A mixture of wet wool, old vinegar, and something animal. You smile. That's the scent of accomplishment and resourcefulness. You did this without coins, without soap, without anyone's help but your own strange mix of desperation and determination. You step back, admire your work, and let your arms rest at your sides. You'll wash yourself later, with the leftover rinse water and a handful of ash. For now, you've earned a moment of peace. Because out here, even cleanliness is a survival skill, and you've just passed the test. You blink against the darkness, your body heavy with fatigue, but sleep won't come. Not yet, because it's your turn. Again. You roll quietly from the straw mattress, avoiding your sister's outstretched foot, and reach for your cloak. It's cold, damp in places, but necessary. Tonight, you are the night watch. Every cottage in the village takes turns guarding. Not from wolves, not usually, but from thieves, fire, or worse, wandering strangers who might carry sickness or carry blades. You step outside into the silence, the chill immediately biting at your nose, and settle onto the bench beside the fire pit. The coals are still warm. You stoke them gently and breathe in the earthy scent of wet wood and old smoke. This isn't some dramatic sentry duty. You're not pacing with a spear, not shouting all's well like a castle guard. You sit, you watch, you listen. For movement, for shadows, for the soft crunch of a footstep in the mud. The village is still, no dogs barking, no owls. Just you and the wind, rustling the thatch and brushing past your ears like a whisper you're too tired to understand. Night watches are rotated among families, usually in 2-hour shifts. Everyone hates it, but everyone does it. It's one of those unspoken laws of peasant survival. No guard, no peace. No peace, no crops. No crops, no life. so you pull the cloak tighter and stare into the gloom, eyes stinging with every blink. Some say this tradition started after a series of barn fires long ago. Others say it's just habit, something born from the natural human urge to be alert when others sleep. Scholars still debate whether peasant villages had formal watch systems, or if it was more instinctual. You don't know, you just know it's your night. You shift on the bench, muscles aching from the day's work. Your fingers toy with the knife at your belt, small, dull, more symbolic than anything. But it gives you comfort. You used it to cut turnips yesterday. Today, it guards your house. You think of your cousin, who once nodded off during a watch and was startled awake by a hedgehog snuffling in the fire pit. He screamed. The hedgehog screamed. The entire family screamed. Now there's a rule about drinking too much ale before your turn. You listen closely. A soft creak? No, just the wind shifting the barn door. You tighten the rope latch anyway. Your sheep bleated earlier than usual today, and you're not sure why. Could have been a fox or just a nightmare. You pace a little to stay awake, circling the yard, boots squelching in the soft earth. You check the corners, you check the shadows. You mutter to yourself like your grandfather used to. Not tonight, not on my watch. There's a strange serenity in this duty, a quiet pride. Everyone else is asleep. Children, elders, even the chickens. And for this one small moment, you are their shield. Not because you're strong, not because you're brave, but because it's your turn. You watch the stars drift behind slow clouds. One twinkles hard. Maybe a planet. Maybe just your tired eyes playing tricks. A light flickers in the distance. The baker's window. He rises early, always baking by moonlight. You wonder if he's watching too. You lift your hand in a slow wave. No response. Doesn't matter. Eventually your shift will end. You'll wake your brother with a nudge and a groan, and he'll grumble his way into the cloak and sit where you sit now, cursing the wind and the stars. But for now, the stillness belongs to you, and no one else. You wake before dawn, stomach grumbling and head fogged from too little sleep. The fire has gone cold, and your fingers ache as you light a new bundle of kindling. Your reward? A thin stream of heat and the chance to boil up breakfast. Fermented oats. You wince slightly as you open the pot. The smell hits you first, sour, earthy and oddly sharp, like old dough and wet stone. The porridge has been sitting in a covered clay pot by the hearth for 2 days. That's intentional. You've been fermenting it. Not for taste, because frankly it tastes like punishment, but for survival. It's breakfast. It's medicine. It's both. You stir the congealed lump with a wooden spoon. It resists you, as if reluctant to admit it's food. You add a little water, scrape off the crust, and set the pot over the fire. Slowly the mass begins to soften, bubble, and yes, stink even more. You've eaten this hundreds of times. You know it will fill you up. You also know it may cause family-wide flatulence by mid-afternoon. It's tradition. Fermentation wasn't just a preservation method in the medieval world, it was nutrition insurance. Fermented oats are easier to digest, richer in certain nutrients, and longer lasting than plain porridge. With no refrigeration, letting grains sour slightly helped keep them safe from spoilage and made them easier on the gut. And when food was scarce, digestion was as important as the food itself. You remember the first time you had it as a child. You cried. Your mother smiled and added a pinch of salt. Better sour than starving, she said. You've repeated those words every winter since. Some scholars argue that fermentation was deliberate peasant wisdom, passed down over centuries. Others suggest it was simply what happened when food sat too long near the fire and no one threw it out. Either way, it became standard fare in homes like yours. You reach into the cupboard and find an old clay bowl, chipped but functional. You ladle in the bubbling mixture, then sprinkle in a few shreds of dried apple and a pinch of salt. Luxury. If it's a feast day, you might even have a spoonful of honey. Today is not a feast day. The first bite is thick and warm with a tang that makes your tongue pull back. But the second bite is easier. The third feels like fuel. It warms your stomach, fills your limbs, and steadies your hands. You glance over at the sleeping forms around the hearth. Soon they'll rise. The youngest will grumble, and you'll press a bowl into his hands with a joke and a shrug. It's porridge or a prayer, you'll say. He'll eat. Your family has survived on this stuff for generations. It may not delight the senses, but it carries you through fields, through storms. Through every long morning of aching backs and heavy boots, that makes it sacred. You scrape the pot clean, not wasting a drop. The crust? You chew it slowly. It's chewy, slightly charred, and more flavourful than you admit. It's also probably older than yesterday's gossip. Outside, the sky's turning pale. The rooster begins its early morning bragging. You wrap your cloak around you, savouring the last bites of heat and oat and quiet before the world wakes up. You exhale, breath steaming slightly in the morning chill. The taste of sour grain still lingers on your tongue. It's not much, but it's enough. And sometimes that's everything. You wipe the last smear of fermented oats from your chin and head outside, bowl in hand, because it's time for the main meal. Not dinner, just the meal. Whatever you call it, it involves tearing day-old bread with fingers that still smell faintly of smoke and cabbage leaf. You might be wondering where the spoons, forks, or dainty plates are hiding. Spoiler, they're not. Tonight, like every night, you're dining with nothing but hands and bread. You duck back into the cottage, where a low-iron pot simmers over the rekindled fire. Inside, turnips, a lonely carrot, and a gamble of beans that may or may not soften before sundown. The broth is thin, coloured more by hope than meat. You reach for 2 round loaves left cooling on the windowsill. Rough-crusted, flour-dusted, and hard enough to serve as improv self-defence. These loaves aren't just food, they're your tableware. With a small knife, you slice the tops off, hollow the middles, and voila, trenchers. Edible bowls straight from the medieval playbook. They soak up every drip of stew that slides down the sides, turning tomorrow's breakfast into damp, flavourful carbs. Mainstream historians will tell you trenchers were standard for centuries, especially before glazed pottery got cheap. Even castles used thick slabs of bread, so servants could cart off sap-soaked leftovers to feed the poor, or the pigs, depending on the cook's mood. You ladle stew into the 2 bread shells until they sag like tired hats. Steam wafts up, fogging your eyes, carrying hints of onion, thyme, and that secret ingredient, anything that didn't crawl away fast enough. You hand one trencher to your cousin, whose grin widens despite the visible beans plotting escape. He tears a corner from the rim, dunks it, and chews with noisy approval. You follow suit. The crust crunches. The inside surrenders into soft, savoury paste. It's like eating a hug that forgot to shower, comforting if a little aromatic. First light joke, you pretend you're at a fancy feast, pinky extended, proclaiming, "Ah yes, 1347's finest vintage of turnip water." Your cousin snorts stew through his nose. Class dismissed. A crumb lands on the dirt floor, no matter. You chase it with your toe until it's lost among earlier crumbs, ash, and maybe the raisins that tried escaping yesterday's oat loaf. You'll sweep later, ashes to ashes, crust to crust. Halfway through, you pause to flex your fingers. They're sticky, glistening, and deliciously warm. There's no fork to keep you distant from your meal. Every bite is tactile, intimate, borderline primal. Some modern chefs call this farm-to-hand dining. You call it Tuesday. Quirky tidbit time. In some regions, servants weren't allowed to lick their fingers until the Lord gave permission. You imagine waiting for that nod while gravy drips down your wrist. Talk about discipline. Your cottage has no such rule. If it drips, you slurp. Second joke, you proclaim yourself Lord of the Lick, give a mock royal wave, then proceed to demonstrate. Your cousin applauds with bread-sticky palms, leaving ghostly prints on his tunic. A cool draught sneaks in through the shutter gap, fluttering the fire. You tilt your trencher to catch the broth before it escapes. The bread shell is softening fast. One more dunk and it might collapse entirely. That's fine. Collapse is edible. You tear a soggy chunk, close your eyes and let it melt on your tongue. The texture is half custard, half memory foam, but the flavour is a miracle of salt and smoke. Forks? They exist, but not here. They're exotic, 2-pronged curiosities reserved for nobles, merchants, and the occasional bishop boasting Italian fashions. Even among the wealthy, many distrust them. Rumours claim they resemble the devil's pitchfork. Scholars still squabble over how quickly forks filtered into everyday use. Some cite 14th century inventories listing silver prongs, while others argue widespread adoption lagged until the 17th century. Meanwhile, your fingers are already perfectly evolved for scooping, pinching, and third joke, performing interpretive dance routines with runaway beans before you eat them. The stew is nearly gone. The trencher walls slump inward, saturated to the core. This is the best part, the sop. You cradle the limp bread bowl with both hands, tilt your head, and bite. Warm broth bursts across your palate, followed by the tang of slightly sourdough crust. You chew slowly, ASMR style, letting the flavours hum like a lullaby against your teeth. Across the hearth your cousin does the same, eyes half closed in bliss. He murmurs, "Better than last year's cabbage water." You nod, remembering that disaster. A pot of boiling greens so sulphurous the goat staged a protest at the door. You set the last fragment of trencher on your wooden board, wondering whether to save it for tomorrow. It's heavy with juice, a treasure of calories. But you're full. Miracle! So you wrap it in cloth for breakfast. Callback. Tomorrow it'll join fermented oats in the pot, turning into yet another creative carb mash. Waste not, chew later. Your fingers are a mess. You wipe them on yesterday's apron, then on a tuft of moss brought in for the purpose. Yes, the same moss that sometimes pulls double duty in the loo bush. Don't judge, it's multitasking. You rinse hands in lukewarm roof water, then warm them by the fire, feeling skin tighten as the damp steams away. The cottage smells of baked bread, cooling ash, and faint bean fumes. Better than dung smoke, worse than lavender. You stretch, spine popping, and feel an easy contentment settle over your shoulders. Eating with hands isn't savage, it's efficient, communal, deeply human. You shared warmth, jokes, calories, and maybe a germ or two, but that's family for you. As the fire dims to red embers, you pat your stomach and sigh. No forks, no porcelain, no problem. Just survival served in a loaf, eaten with gratitude and 10 wiggly utensils you carry everywhere. And in this medieval night, with the taste of sop lingering on your lips, that feels like luxury enough to sing you softly toward the coming second sleep. You sit beside the fire, arms tucked into your tunic sleeves, listening to the quiet crackle of a new log catching flame. The chores are finished. The laundry is steaming dry by the hearth. The goat is locked up, still giving you the side-eye after the cabbage leaf incident, and your belly, miraculously, is full. But the cold creeps in again, and the ache in your joints whispers that tomorrow's labour is already waiting. You pull your blanket tighter and ease onto your side. The straw mattress rustles under you, still prickly despite how many times you've beaten it flat. You can feel each ridge and knot like tiny mountains pressing into your back. But it's familiar, it's real, and it's home. Your sister mumbles something in her sleep. A foot nudges your leg. You shift without complaint. You're used to this nighttime tangle of elbows and shins, like a pile of puppies who never figured out where their own limbs end. It's not comfort, but it's warmth. Your fingers brush against the trench of your blanket's stitching, loose in one corner, knotted like a secret in the other. You told yourself you'd repair it days ago. Maybe tomorrow, if your hands still work after the morning's bread kneading. The room is dark now, lit only by the soft glow of firelight playing across the wattle walls. The smoke has thinned, and the air feels heavy with the scent of ash, bread, and a hint of time still clinging to the pot's rim. It's quiet. Deep quiet. The kind that wraps itself around your body and presses softly on your eyelids. You hear an owl in the distance, maybe near the orchard, or maybe just your imagination weaving sounds into the gaps left behind by fatigue. It doesn't matter. You let it lull you further. You've survived another day, not thrived, not conquered, but survived, with dry bread and cabbage poultices, with ash-swept floors and clumps of moss, with trenchers for spoons and fermented porridge for dreams. The tools may be primitive, the methods strange, but they worked. They still work, and you did it. You are doing it. Tomorrow will bring its own miseries, frozen fingers, stubborn roots, someone tracking manure back into the house. But tonight there is warmth on your cheeks, a full belly, and the scratchy, smoky smell of life carried into your lungs with each breath. You let your eyes close. You let your shoulders sink into the straw. You did enough today. And now, as the last ember fades, the sounds of sleep all around you, and your feet tucked beneath your cousin's blanket thief knees, you drift. Not quickly, not completely, but gently, like moss soaking in a trickle of rainwater. The rooster hasn't crowed yet, but your eyes open anyway. The second sleep ended sooner than you'd like. Your joints are stiff. Your blanket is half off, and someone has stolen your spot by the fire. Again. You sit up slowly, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, blinking in the soft blue light of pre-dawn. The air smells like damp wood, something faintly sour and, yes, bread. You forgot to hang the trenchers by the hearth last night, and now they've gone crusty again. No matter. They'll soften in the morning brew, they always do. Today isn't a rest day despite the dullness in your bones. It's gathering day. The thatch roof is thinning in spots, and if you don't restock your supply of reeds soon, you'll be waking up with puddles on your face when the rain returns. You wrap your cloak around your shoulders, grab your knife and a woven sack, and slip out quietly, leaving the cottage behind like a sleeping beast. The marsh is a half-hour's walk, longer if it's rained recently. Your boots squelch in the soft earth, the path uneven and studded with stones polished smooth by centuries of peasant feet. You've taken this walk dozens of times, yet it never feels familiar. The landscape always changes, one day dry, one day flooded, one day full of biting bugs and muttering frogs. Today, it's misty. Everything is quiet. Perfect. Gathering thatch is a chore that blends ritual with necessity. You reach the reeds just as the mist begins to lift. The tall stalks sway in silence, their heads heavy with dew. You grip your blade and begin slicing them down in careful handfuls, laying them out in even rows. You'll let them dry a little before bundling. Too wet, and they'll rot in the attic. Too dry, and they snap in the wind. Thatched roofs may seem quaint to modern eyes, but in the medieval world they were the gold standard of peasant engineering, insulating in winter, breathable in summer, and repairable without coins. Scholars agree that maintenance was constant. You know this personally. That roof has been patched so many times it creaks in a new language. You think of last winter when a leak opened above your sleeping mat. It dripped all night. You woke with your blankets soaked and your patience frayed. The next morning you trudge back out here in a hailstorm to find the best reeds you could, swearing at every duck and slipping on every stone. Today is easier. The ground is soft but walkable. The reeds are thick, and your hands move with purpose. Slice, lay, tie, stack. You pause to stretch your back, watching the sky brighten with pink streaks. A heron lifts from the water's edge, wings slicing the air like a prayer. You smile despite yourself. Not everything here is hard. Some things, like this silence, this mist, this rhythm of cutting and tying, feel almost sacred. You bind your last bundle and sling it over your shoulder, the weight manageable but solid. Tomorrow, it'll keep someone dry. Maybe you, maybe the baby's corner. Either way, you'll sleep better knowing the rain will have to try harder. You begin the walk home, the sun at your back, your feet steady, the world slowly waking around you. By the time you return to the cottage, the fire is crackling again, and the family is stirring. Someone's already chewing loudly on reheated stew. The youngest is chasing the chicken indoors again, shrieking half in play, half in genuine fear. You dodge the chaos and slip your thatch bundle beside the wall, out of the way of stray feet and muddy boots. But you're not done. Not yet. Because this afternoon is laundry day, and today you're finally making soap. Not the flowery kind, not bars wrapped in silk ribbon, no scent of lavender, no promises of moisturizing lather. This is lye soap, raw and rough and homemade from the residue of your fire and the leavings of your kitchen. It stings if you use too much. It smells faintly of bacon and sin, but it scrubs the filth out of wool faster than anything else you've tried. You pull out the supplies from under the bench, a clay jug of lye water, made from rainwater filtered through ash from your hearth, and a jar of saved fat, goose drippings, bacon scrapings, even some tallow you skimmed off a pot weeks ago and kept cool in the root cellar. It's congealed, slightly yellow, and smells determined. You pour the fat into a shallow pan and warm it gently near the coals, stirring until it turns to liquid. Then, carefully, slowly, you add the lye. It fizzes just a little. You stir in slow, steady circles, watching it thicken, swirl, and eventually become a grey, viscous ooze. This is the alchemy of the peasant world. Dirt to cleanliness, waste to usefulness. You've done this before. You know the proportions by heart, learned by trial and error, and the memory of the time you burned your cousin's hands when the batch was too strong. She still tells that story. You pretend to be sorry. Scholars note that soap making in medieval villages was rare among individual households. Often, it was left to specialists or communal workshops. But some families, especially in colder regions, made their own. You're one of them. Not out of luxury, but because no one else wants to, and you have steady hands. As the mixture begins to cool, you pour it into a mould made from a split piece of wood. Tomorrow it'll harden. A week from now it'll be dry enough to cut. In a month it'll be usable. If you're lucky, it won't eat holes in your sleeves. You take the leftover grease-smudged spoon and clean it with a rag, then use the still warm pot to heat water for rinsing the baby's cloths. You don't waste, ever. The cottage is louder now. Your brother is singing something off-key while hanging laundry. You shout at him to stop wasting your clean rope. He shouts back that it was his rope first. You remind him it came off your dead aunt's donkey. Argument ends. Victory yours. You haul the first armful of laundry into the tub, adding a sliver of last year's soap and enough hot water to make it bubble faintly. The smell rises. Wood ash, fat, wet wool. A medieval perfume if there ever was one. Your hands plunge into the mixture, scrubbing fabric against itself. Fingers numb, knuckles red. But with every squeeze and twist, the garments change. Whiter, softer, less like things found in a ditch. You glance outside at the line, now fluttering with clean tunics and socks like surrender flags to the wind. Another task, another victory, small but vital. This soap, this stink, this scrubbing. It's not glamorous, but it means survival. It means dignity. It means fewer infections, fewer lice, fewer reasons for the healer to mutter darkly over you while waving sage and judgment. You lean back on your heels, wiping your hands on your apron, staring at the sudsy water. Not bad. You made this. From ash and fat and fire. Magic in its messiest form. The sun dips low, brushing the tops of the trees in golden fire as you make your way toward the old field. Not for ploughing, not today, but for something far stranger and far more seasonal. You're here to harvest nettles. Not exactly the dream chore. The sting of a nettle is sharp, relentless, and always arrives at the exact second you think you've been careful enough. But you've learned to respect this prickly plant, because in this strange medieval world, nettles are more than weeds. They're survival in green disguise. You carry a rough-woven basket padded inside with an old linen scrap. Your sleeves are pulled down over your hands, not because you're afraid, okay, maybe a little, but because nettles fight back. Their tiny barbs inject a sting that can last for hours. But harvested correctly, cut low with a blade, not bare fingers, they can be food, fibre, even medicine. You crouch by the edge of the patch, blade in hand, and begin slicing the younger stalks. The older ones are too tough. The young ones, tender, dark green and full of sting, are what you want. Once home, you'll boil them. Twice. The sting dies in hot water, and what remains is a leafy vegetable rich in iron and flavour, like spinach with ambition and a criminal record. You'll mix them into porridge or stew. If you're lucky, maybe into a tart if you've got enough flour scraped together. Nettles also make strong cordage. You've twisted dried nettle fibres into twine before. Good for tying bundles, mending sacks, or hanging herbs from the rafters. You even once saw a shirt made entirely from nettle cloth. It looked stiff enough to march into battle alone. Scholars remain divided on just how central nettles were to the medieval peasant's life. Some argue they were a last resort, food for famine. Others insist they were a respected crop, cultivated intentionally. You don't need parchment to tell you nettles matter. You just need an empty pantry and a cold wind. You gather slowly, methodically. A bird cries overhead. A breeze rustles the field. The scent of crushed nettles drifts up. Green, sharp, and slightly peppery. Back at the cottage, you hang some of the older stalks to dry for later. The younger ones go straight into the pot, where they'll boil down into something humble but hearty. As you stir the pot, you press your palm to your cheek. You didn't escape unscathed. A few barbs caught you through the cloth, and your skin is tingling. It's not exactly pain. It's more like a persistent itch that's been promoted. No matter, you've had worse. You ladle the nettle stew into your bowl, add a crust of bread and sit near the hearth. The taste is earthy, grassy, with a hint of bitter warmth. It's not delicious, but it's good, honest, nourishing. Your cousin grimaces after his first bite, then shrugs and takes a second. That's usually how it goes. You tell him about nettle cloth again. He doesn't believe you. You swear it's true. He counters with a tale of a man who made shoes from moss. You declare a draw. As the fire crackles and the sky darkens to deep violet, you finish your bowl and rinse it in the leftover bath water. A nettle leaf floats in the pot. You pluck it out carefully, toss it into the fire, and watch it curl and blacken in the heat. Not all heroes wear cloaks. Some just sting your fingers and taste like lawn. But tonight, they fill your belly, and that's enough. You wake to the gentle pitter-patter of rain on the thatched roof, soft and steady like a lullaby reversed. The cottage smells of damp straw, smoke and stew that's been reheated too many times. But it's warm, sort of. You sit up slowly, blinking into the grey light seeping through the oiled parchment window. It's raining. Again. That means no gathering, no fishing, no firewood, but there's work to be done indoors, and today that means mending. Your fingers are stiff, your knees ache, but you grab your sewing kit from the shelf. It's a small sack filled with bits of bone needles, twisted thread, and fabric scraps from garments long gone. Some of the thread is spun from nettle fibre, some from unravelling seams on older clothes. Nothing goes to waste, not even broken seams. You pull your tunic from the wall, the sleeve has torn again, right at the elbow where fabric always gives first. You sigh and thread the needle, wetting the end of the thread with your tongue and whispering a little curse that feels more effective than prayer. Mending is slow, repetitive and necessary. You stitch in silence, the rhythm of thread and cloth sinking with the rain. In, out, pull, in, out, pull. You've done this so many times your fingers find their way even with your eyes closed. Somewhere across the room, your younger sibling is patching a pair of socks, tongue sticking out with concentration. Another is trying to fix a cracked shoe with glue made from boiled hooves and desperation. Everyone has a job. Mending isn't optional. It's survival with a needle and no time for perfection. Modern folks throw away socks when they sprout a hole. You laugh at the thought. If that rule applied here, you'd be barefoot before breakfast. Instead, you've got shoes with 3 layers of patches and tunics held together by faith and whip stitch. Scholars often overlook this quiet part of medieval life, the never-ending repair of garments, tools, homes and bodies. But this was the real backbone of peasant survival. Maintenance. You didn't buy new, you didn't order replacements, you made what you had last. You pause and stretch your fingers. The rain is still falling, now heavier, now softer, like the sky's thinking through its sadness. You pull the blanket closer and keep sewing. Each stitch has a story. The scarf with the burn mark from when you leaned too close to the stew pot. The apron with the wine stain from last solstice. The woolen hat patched with linen because your cousin borrowed it for goat duty and didn't ask nicely. You finish the tunic sleeve and set it aside. Next is the sack for carrying grain, then the curtain flap for the door. It's tearing at the bottom again. The wind's been tugging it like a hungry spirit. You'll hem it short so it doesn't drag. Sometimes you imagine what it would be like to own new clothes. Not patched, not stained. Just new. Smooth seams, clean edges. A tunic that doesn't smell like 5 seasons of soup. But then you look at your stitch work, crooked but solid, and feel a strange pride. This is yours. These are the clothes that kept you warm when the firewood ran out. The socks that hugged your toes on the frostbitten trail. The hat that made the baby laugh because you sewed on ears by accident and pretended it was intentional. You mend because you must, but also because you can. The rain softens again. You finish the last stitch, tie the thread, and tuck the needle back in the pouch. Outside, the world is soaked and still. Inside, things are whole, if only for now. You hang the mended tunic near the fire to dry, brush the scraps into a basket, and stretch your arms until your spine pops. Rainy days may be cold, but they're perfect for making things last. The rain has passed, the air outside smells like wet wood and earth, and the world feels rinsed, like it's been gently scoured by a kindly giant with a bucket and a sense of humour. You step out into the pale afternoon light, letting your boots sink slightly into the mud. Everything glistens, the trees drip, the chickens complain softly, feathers puffed up in disapproval, but you smile. Today you're going foraging, not just for food, but for healing. Because your supply of field remedies is running low, and you never know when someone's going to get a burn, a rash, or a very peasant-style bout of existential dread brought on by stew fatigue. You sling a basket over your shoulder and set off toward the hedgerow. It's thick with brambles, but it's also where the best plants grow. You begin collecting yarrow for wounds, plantain leaves for stings, elderberries for fevers, and a few sprigs of calendula because they make the salve smell slightly less like roasted badger. Each plant has a purpose. You learn them one by one, crouched beside the village healer as she muttered rhymes that made no sense unless you already knew the answer. If it grows by the gate, it soothes what you ate. If it's under a tree, it helps you pee. You still don't know if that second one's medically sound, but it's saved a few awkward conversations. Modern folks chase after pills with names like whispered spells, but here you rely on what you can pluck, mash, boil and smear. You've made infusions with willow bark for headaches, salves from goose grease and chamomile, and even once tried to treat your brother's hiccups with nettle tea and a loud slap. It worked. Possibly too well. Scholars remain divided, of course, on how scientifically effective these field remedies were. Some dismiss them as superstition. Others point to pharmacological roots in many modern medicines. You don't need a scroll to know that comfrey poultice saved your aunt's ankle after she slipped on that cursed onion peel. You crouch beneath a rowan tree and gather bark flakes, stuffing them into a pouch lined with sheep's wool. You hum while you work, a tune your grandmother used to sing, low, repetitive, calming, like the wind through wheat. Back home, you lay everything out on the hearthstone, herbs, leaves, berries, bark. You separate the fresh from the drying, tying bundles with rough twine and hanging them from the rafters like an upside-down garden. Then you get to work. Mortar and pestle, copper kettle, beeswax and fat. You're making a healing salve tonight, a blend of calendula, plantain and yarrow mashed into a soft golden green paste. It smells earthy and sweet, like moss with ambition. You pour the mixture into a small crock, seal it with cloth and wax and label it with a charcoal mark. Not elegant, but it saved more skin than any saint you've prayed to. As the cottage settles into evening, the scent of herbs drifts through the air. It mixes with smoke, wool and bread, forming a smell that is uniquely yours, a scent of work, of care, of survival. You tuck the salve onto a shelf beside the vinegar, the garlic string, and that one weird jar no one touches anymore, just in case. Your cousin pokes his head in, mutters about a thorn in his finger and looks at your pace suspiciously. You dab a bit on and grin when he hisses. That means it's working, you say. He doesn't believe you, but he doesn't argue either. Outside, the stars blink into the night one by one. Inside, your world is calm. For now. You lie back on your straw bedding, arms behind your head, looking at the herbs swaying in the beams above. You've built this life with your hands, calloused, cracked, but capable. You've survived another day, with roots and leaves, with cloth and coals, with dirt under your nails and smoke in your lungs, but also with knowledge. Quiet, green and ancient, you breathe in and smile. Because here, in this forgotten corner of time, survival isn't just instinct, it's craft, it's care, it's you.